as I woke up this morning and tried to figure out how to, how to prepare myself to engage with some of the finest minds on peace, conflict, and violence issues in the world, I did what I do most mornings, which is turn on my Al Jazeera television. And of course, what I heard was Busha, Mariupol, Donbass, Israel and Palestine, Ethiopia, Tigray, and so on. Violence across the universe. And I thought, well, these are if that's what we're going to engage in today, then I think we have a rich field in which to act and to play. So it's a pleasure. I've been listening today. I'll be more of a fly on the wall today because we're so caught up in violence and conflict and death around the world. You must have heard of the 40 people who died at the train station this morning in close to Mariupol. So I think we'll all be listening in the hope that this publication will move us one step closer to understanding what it is about human nature that so much violence continues to, we continue to experience so much violence across the world. One of the things I'll be emphasizing is time. So without further ado, I would love to call on I was just looking to see if Dr. Anna is with us, and I hope she is. And if she is, I'd love to have you, Dean, talk, get us going. Dr. Addis is the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences of George Mason University. I hope you're there, and if you are, it's over to you, ma'am. I wasn't exactly certain if I saw, about 50 of us or 45 of us already. I don't know if Dr. Addis is around, and if she isn't, I'll just go on to, and she'll of course have time to speak when she comes in. I'll invite Dr. Özerdem, Alpaslan Özerdem, the Dean of the Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution here in the neighborhood. I am in Fairfax, Virginia, and I know you're not very far away from here. So if Dr. Özerdem is with us, please, it's over to you.
Yes, I'm here, Eric, and good
Wonderful.
morning, everyone. And it's so nice to know that we are neighbors, and so we have another reason to get together sometime soon. So, hello, everyone. I'm Dean of Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution, and it's my really great pleasure to be one of the co-sponsors of this important event, the launching of the Encyclopedia of Violence, Peace, and Conflict. And what a publication that is. It's just amazing with all the contributors and the contributions that includes. Let me just start by saying a few words about our Peace Week and why I think the launching of this book is really important during this Peace Week. So as a Carter School, twice a year, we organize a Peace Week really to reach out to wider audiences. As a Carter School, it really matters to us that the scholarship on peace and conflict studies would find close linkages and engagement with practice. I think for us, relevance is really important. And I think in all disciplines, relevance matters. But for me, when it comes to peace studies, it has to be relevant to conflicts experienced by many communities across the world. Eric has just mentioned a number of conflicts that taken place today and the human carnage we are experiencing in Ukraine, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in DRC, and in many parts of the world. So this is why I think this publication is really important, and it's really a great honor to have the launching of this publication as part of our Peace Week. And as the Carter School, we are celebrating our 40th anniversary. The George Mason University is celebrating its 50th anniversary. So this is a week of celebration for us here in Fairfax, Arlington, and other campuses of George Mason. With that in mind, I congratulate Lester for really going through this amazing process. I think those of us who edited a volume would know what that means, but editing a volume of Encyclopedia, that is quite something. And I had the chance of looking at the Encyclopedia and the contributions and the quality of contributions and the diversity and the diversity of contributors from across the world. I think that really matters, because when it comes to peace and conflict studies, we need to be able to reflecting that diversity. There is not just one version of how to make peace, build peace. There are all sorts of different ways of doing this. And I often get quite upset that there is that domination of the Western-centric version of peacemaking and peace building across the world. So I think this encyclopedia is really important to bring everything together from different contributors from different parts of the world. And another, I think, really important reason for this publication, in peace and conflict studies, at least at the Carter School, we are a very interdisciplinary institution. So I have colleagues from political science, international relations, sociology, anthropology, psychology, history, you name it, I think we have it. And I think that's what needs to be, because in order to study violence, peace and conflict, you really need to have those different backgrounds and understanding. And, but we also need some commonalities. So in terms of our courses, our journals, our conferences, we need to be a community, right? So I think that's really important. And I think this publication, Encyclopedia of Violence, Peace and Conflict, is one of these cornerstones, bringing those different disciplines, backgrounds together, right? And this is why I give a high importance to this publication, and thanking you for being part of this process. And the second and final point I want to make is that, as Eric rightly pointed out, the urgency of those issues and challenges we are facing in different parts of the world. And with that, the connection between the scholarship and practice. So obviously, us academics do publish books, journal articles, and I think often we fail to reach out to the practitioners on the ground with the academic publications. We need to translate the knowledge in different ways. And having this kind of publication, an encyclopedia where the primary foundational meaning and understanding of different concepts and the terms we use in our field, and collecting them in one place, right? And I think that is really important to bridge that gap between scholarship and practice, because it's like one place to go for information for many practitioners. So I think there are, in fact, so many reasons, but I know that we have very limited time. So I really want to conclude my remarks by saying, well done, everybody. I think this is a great job that you've done collectively. And Dr. Lester Kurtz, what an amazing job this is. And thanks very much for resilience. I'm sure you needed so much resilience in this process, and your really kind of vision to lead a process like this. Peace and conflict studies need people like you and your colleagues who contributed in this publication. Thank you so much for your hard work and your engagement in this process. So These
Thank
are
you
my
so
remarks,
much.
and I wish you all a very successful program today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dean Özerdem. And I just let you eat into the time that we had allotted to Dean, the other, Dean Anne. And anytime she gets here, we'll give her the 3 minutes I took from her. And I'll immediately just turn to Professor Liu, my apologies, who's in Nanjing University. And it's over to you, sir. Professor Liu, your microphone is not turned up.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's my, it's my great pleasure, also honor to be invited by Professor Les Kurtz to attending this great event as a speaker. And this moment, I remember 5 years ago, Lester accompanied me on a tour of Martin Luther King Memorial Square in Washington, D.C. You know, it is very next to the Korean War Memorial. I remember we chose a statue of Martin as a background for a photo, but we facing off into the far distance beyond the war memorial. At that time, as a Chinese, my feeling were mixed. As you know, war is very close to us now. And the war requires many conditions, such as commanders, soldiers, courage, patience, money, etc. This encyclopedia, the great book, also need many conditions, such as that's the Kurtz, our editor-in-chief, professional scholars, courage, patience, money, and so on. The needs of the two are very similar, but the results are totally different. War is death, but our encyclopedia brings hope and peace. So this great book in China, somewhat a little bit is expensive for Chinese, but compare the cost of war, I would like to say that in terms of the piece value of this great book, every people deserves a copy. So dreams and visions are very important. I think the peace-loving people are idealists, and writing encyclopedia needs idealism. So many times we cannot reach our goals, but they are still a beacon that guides us toward it. This great book, I think, is the top tone that guides us in the right direction of peace. So many thanks, Lest, my colleague and friends, and all the contributors. I'm honored to have the opportunity to be one of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Liu, and we'll give Professor Kurtz a chance to replicate, to thank you in return. We're still hoping that Dean Anadis will join us, and I'm told she will at some point. We're doing well on time, and I'm going to be calling on Professor Kurtz now to give us an overview of this, what Professor Louis calls the Great Book, and you do something that I find quite fascinating. You compare the value of this encyclopedia to the cost of war, which is quite amazing. And I want us to think about that. And as we're thinking about it, Professor Kurtz, I'll turn to you to give us an overview of this massive publication.
Thank you so much. What an incredible pleasure to be with you folks today. And I wanted to thank those of you who came, all of the contributors, the board of editors, some of you most of whom are with us here today. And it's been such an incredible opportunity to engage in this, and appreciate all of you coming to help celebrate it with me, and to spend some time to think about what we need to do and say. And I'm going to share my screen with you and try to be more efficient in running through some of these ideas very quickly. So we have so much incredible scholarship on these three themes of violence, peace, and conflict. But why is there so much exquisite scholarship and so little peace? Why do we have so much violence? And so what I was thinking, when I think of violence and the problem of violence, I often remember Hercules being sent to kill the Hydra who guards the underworld. And every time he whacks off one of the heads of the Hydra, two more grow in its place. And this seems to be what happens when we use violence to attack violence. And it seems to be growing exponentially whenever we try to attack it. But now we also have seen the alternative as well, because the multiplication takes place when we use peace and nonviolence as well as when we use violence. So today I'm having us hoping that we can address three questions. What do we know? Which is sort of the purpose of the encyclopedia, to bring together the scholarship across disciplines, across nations, across the timelines. What do we know? What do we need to know? What research is left to do? And what do we need to do? What kinds of actions do we need to take? Now, I can't get through all of this today. I do have, and I'm going to stick in the chat box I'm going to stick in the chat box after I'll have to wait till I'm finished with my 10 minutes, a link to this, to my preface in the encyclopedia, and to these slides, and to where the encyclopedia is located online in Science Direct. So you can take a look at what is there. So what I like to do, first of all, is to think about the themes that I have seen emerge in this encyclopedia. And we have 4 volumes. We have maybe 2 million words, and quite a remarkable. So it's like going back to grad school again, trying to read all of these articles as they came in. And here's what I think, first of all, is that there are many forms of violence. And I was inspired by Johan Galtung, one of our well-known elders in this field, who is the one who I think pointed out very insightfully that there's more than one type of violence. And I have found his addition to direct violence, structural and cultural violence, as concepts for thinking about the different forms that violence comes in. And in fact, we've used that to try to organize the material in this encyclopedia, rather than organizing it by the traditional disciplines. So we sat down with the 200, I think there are 260 some articles in the final version, and sat down with my wife, Dr. Mariam Kurtz, and we tried to place all of the articles within this kind of framework. So we have direct violence. This is what we usually think about violence, but we also have structural violence. That's the kind of violence that is caused, the kind of harm that's caused by the way society is structured. Things like inequality, racism, malnutrition, and so forth. Then there's cultural violence with harmful themes like racism and sexism that injure people directly, but also legitimize the other kinds of violence, structural violence and direct violence. And to his triangle to Professor Galtung's triangle, I've added a fourth of eco-violence, which originally I thought was just violence by people against the environment. But now in the pandemic, we see, in a sense, nature coming back to us and saying, no, this is the kind of violence that we're engaged in against nature is not possible. What I'm also hoping that we can do is to think about how this web of violence that Jennifer Turpin and I wrote about many years ago can be transformed to a web of nonviolence, that we have violence at different levels from the micro to the macro level, but that it also, we structure violence, but we can also, and we do structure nonviolence. A second major theme I've seen in our study of violence is ambivalence. There's a literal notion here of bivalence. There's a positive and a negative charge. We're drawn to violence, but we're also repulsed by it. And we engage, therefore, in contradictory behavior. We condemn violence on the one hand, but we use violence to achieve peace on the other. A third theme I want to lift up is all of the paradoxes of these three themes of violence, peace, and conflict. And violence appears to be an easy solution, but in fact, it's really hard to do. It's hard to commit acts of violence. Violence is difficult to carry out at a micro level, at an interpersonal level, because it imposes great costs. It damages relationships. It creates psychological costs that are revealed in high incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, among combat veterans who are forced to kill other people, especially what Rachel McNair calls perpetrator-induced traumatic stress, PITS. That is the trauma that's experienced by those who inflict violence. This is also true, of course, at the macro level. We have to spend billions of dollars to mobilize violence against people. And we've seen the difficulty in doing that with all of the failed occupations that the Soviet Union and the United States and other countries that have occupied nations by military force. And we are now seeing the difficulty that Russia is having in taking over the Ukraine, but will probably have if they try to hold it, if they are ever able to actually occupy it, which we hope they will not. The next step, however, is to look at what I think is a kind of revolutionary breakthrough by Mahatma Gandhi with nonviolent civil resistance. And in the 20th century, we see the emergence of strategic nonviolence, but also attention to nonviolence in its many forms, just as we have violence in many forms. We have throughout the world's faith traditions and ethical traditions, this clear contradiction. This is back to the ambivalence of violence, of the warrior and the pacifist, the warrior who believes there's some kind of sacred duty to fight, to use violence, the pacifist who believes that there's a duty not to harm others. And what Gandhi did was to take these two contradictory themes, put them together with a nonviolent activist who fights or can fight like a warrior, but also avoids harming like a pacifist. But this kind of direct violence direct nonviolence is only one part. So if we can flip Galtung's triangle or the violence diamond and look at the nonviolence diamond and begin thinking about how can we structure nonviolence. So we have the direct nonviolence, social movements, civil resistance, protest, persuasion, nonviolent non-cooperation, nonviolent intervention. But we also have structural nonviolence, systems of justice, equality of opportunity, basic needs, peace systems, peaceful societies, Bhutan's gross national happiness economy. We also have cultural nonviolence, themes of peace culture, love, justice, equality and equity, well-being, empathy. And we have sustainability, eco-nonviolence, deep ecology, and our efficient use of resources. So finally, what do we do? And I take my cue from Gandhi again. We listen, we analyze, and we mobilize. We listen, first of all, listening and analyzing. This is where the scholarship comes in. This is our role in terms of the scholarship, of trying to listen in all of the ways we can listen to the people who are suffering around the world, and to the non-humans who are suffering around the world, and then analyze what's the structure of structural violence, of cultural violence. And then finally, we need to mobilize movements of nonviolence. And the scholarship involves figuring out how to best do that and how to facilitate that, so that we can in fact move toward fair distribution and sustainability. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the others. Back to you, Eric.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Kurtz. And you know, the 2 minutes I took from Anne, you gave them back to us, and we'll use them wisely. Thank you so much. And you took us right to the moment when we have to move on to different parts of the world to hear from eminent minds in these parts. My feeling as I listen to you is that this presentation ought to be taken to the United Nations. And I hope I'm not the only one thinking about it. I think if we don't educate the world, and the United Nations gives us just such an opportunity to do it, if we don't do that, I think, we'll be talking for a long time, and you guys will be thinking and writing for a long time. And the wars and the conflicts of the world will continue. So let's think strategically about what we do next after this. Having said that, we'll move on to I'm sure there'll be lots of reactions to what Professor Kurtz said. We will get to that much later on in the day. But for now, we want to do the rounds of the regions of the world and to bring in some keynote speakers from the different parts. And I'd love to start with, if you don't mind, the keynote speaker from Asia, and that would be Professor Chaiwat Satha-Anand, who's a distinguished professor of political science at the Thammasat University in Thailand. I can see you there, sir, so I will invite you now to give us the perspective from your part of the world, from Thailand.
Thank you, Eric, and it's so good to see all of you. Lester, some old friends, Matt is here, Vidya is here, and Shianit is here, so I don't see her often. Can I be allowed to share my screen? Can the host please allow me to share my screen? It's all right? Okay. I have 10 minutes, so it starts now. Peace be with you all. I don't know what Lester wants me to say, but I want to say what I want to say. So the topic will be Hands of Peace in Asia. And the thesis of today's talk is this. The hands are used as symbolic analogy to methodologically identify peace cultures in Asia in tackling problems of violence in contemporary societies. This is what I want to do. Okay, take a cue from what you have done earlier on, elucidate all the typologies of violence. But why the hands? Because the hands is important. Look at Wilson's work. Wilson is arguing in this work, the hand, how its use shapes the brain, language, and human culture. So it's not the other way around. It's not the brain that shapes the hand. It's not the language. It's the hand that shapes human culture. So I take that as a cue, and I will talk about this in 4 steps. First is Gandhi's one hand. Second is my teacher, Glenn D. Page's 2 hands. It doesn't mean that Gandhi has 1 hand. I will focus on Gandhi's 1 hand, okay? And then joining the 2 hands with peace cultures. And I'll end, like you have gracefully begun for us, Gandhi's world of tomorrow. Now, Gandhi and the left hand, 1 hand. One time, Gandhi was holding up his left hand with fingers outspread, and he would check them off with his right forefingers. He said, this is equality for the untouchables. This is spinning. This is keeping off drink and drugs. This is Hindu-Muslim friendship. This is equality for women. And then he said, the risk is nonviolence. the risk is nonviolence. Of course, when he was talking about the spinning, it's not the spinning, it's an economic independence of a people. When he was talking about keeping off drink and drugs for the Hindus and the Indians, he's not talking about health situation alone, but he's talking about a clear mind in which you will be allowed to be a master of yourself in fighting imperialist powers. And of course, Hindu-Muslim friendship, this is inter-religious, inter-ethnic groups, importance, and equality for women. Okay, and the rest is nonviolence. So that's Gandhi's left hand. Yeah. Now, taking a cue from my teacher Glendy Page, who passed away in 2017, Page suggests that 5 fingers on the left hand represent 5 major global problems. For him, this is peace and disarmament, economic justice, human rights, environmental preservation, and achievement of human cooperation. Then he indicates that the 5 fingers on the right hand represent the Gandhian legacy. The Gandhian legacy, which includes spirit, science, individual and mass action, compassionate constructiveness, and creative courage. So he argues that the global nonviolent awakening can be realized if the hand of Gandhian legacy can be brought to bear upon the hand of global problems. This is Page understanding, and I am using Page as an entry point. Now, a major problem for the lack of peace in Asia or elsewhere in the world is not that violent problems cannot be identified, nor solutions for them articulated. In order to solve the problem of poverty, for example, resulting from an overemphasis on economic growth, GDP, so you think about distribution of income and resources, that should be underscored. So gross national happiness. If an authoritarian regime is a problem, democratization is a solution. Now, what is lacking, however, is the transformative force, which would bring appropriate solutions to bear upon the curtailment of human potentialities in Asia and elsewhere in the world. That transformative force is peace culture. I would argue that this is what peace culture is all about. You know, how you solve the problem of violence in all of its dimensions. Now, 2 hands mirroring Asian cultures, the symbolic quality of using the 2-hand analogy as methodology is that it mirrors Asian culture, I would argue. In everyday life in Asia, it is culture that brings the 2 hands together. These 2 in Asia. You will see that, you know, you have on your left, the Indian Namaste. Yeah. And then on your right, you have the Chinese, the East Asian traditional, you know, greetings. You have also, if you like Kung Fu movies, it's a whole fist salute, and it has the fist and palm salute and all this. So it's the 2 hands that come together. In the middle, you have Thai culture, Sawadee Krap, you know, or Sawadee Ka, like this. So it's different than Indian and Chinese. And I'm asking you not to look at this as countries, rather as civilizations. So you have on one hand Indian civilization, on the other you have Chinese civilization, and then you have a country in between, or societies in between. So the Thai adapts all of this, and this is how we do it. We call it Sawadee Krap. I am a man, so I say Krap. A woman will say Krap. Now, if you go further, then among the Muslim women, in greeting people with salams, a Muslim use both hands to touch both hands of the other person. It's different, you know. It's not a shake hand, it's both hands of the other. So her right hand, the solutions, rest on the left hand, the problems of the other party. Because of the touching aspect, which is now prohibitive in the pandemic context, this gesture cannot be done from a distance. As a result, the human bond is supposed to be closer and more accurate, more concretely reflected. And this is, of course, a problem in this pandemic era. Now, using Page creative analysis as point of departure, 5 5 major problems hindering peace in Asia, representing 5 fingers on left hand, can be identified. Then 5 fingers on the right with reflect solutions to this problem. In bringing the right hand to bear upon the left, a unique Asian gesture, as I said, results. In various Asian culture, this gesture is a form of greeting as well as an aspect of religious salutation. In its social greetings mode, the gesture established friendly and peaceful ties among human beings. In its religious mode, it constructs a respectful bridge between human beings and the transcendence. This gesture can be applied almost all over Asia, influenced by Hinduism, Confucianism, Buddhism, and to some extent Islam. Now, what you have there, the hand of problems on your left, is that you have, I would say, death by despair. I put South Korea there because South Korea is the country with the highest number of death by despair, suicide, alcoholism, one of the top, you know. And then the second one is heightened identitarian politics. You have India. You have a major party calling for the killing of a group of people, millions, you know, and still running in the election. Obscene social injustice and structural violence. You have Indonesia, Thailand, where one millionaire can have enough for the 100 people in Indonesia, for example. Remilitarization war. You have North Korea, you have China, India, Saudi Arabia. You can look at the rise in military expenditure in all of this. So this is the problem. Then you have ecological exploitation. You look at deforestation rate. You have the Philippines, Indonesia, Nepal. These are on top of the list. Now, the hands of peaceful solution. You have living consciously. You have detoxicating identities. You have just power distribution. You have non-violence, non-killing, and you have harmonious living with nature. So you brought these two together, and you can solve the problem. What can bring the two together? It is culture. Inner peace can be taught in Buddhism, you know, about remind Asians of who they are. In Taoism, it obscures the line, you know, separate self from the other, we, us from them. If the state and structural violence grounded in unequal distribution of power is to be done away, then disobedience of unjust structure, of unstructured, I need 1 more minute, Bless. Is that okay? 1 more minute, Eric, okay? By Islam and Confucius make it easier for diplomacy to replace warfare and others. Finally, understanding the sacredness of nature cherished in Hinduism will restore a sense of harmony between human beings and nature. And so Gandhi and the world of tomorrow. Gandhi writes, perhaps never before has there been so much speculation about the future as there is today. Will our world always be one of violence? Will there always be poverty, starvation, misery? Will we have a firmer and wide belief in religion, or will the world be godless? If there is to be a great change in society, how will that change be wrought? By war, revolution, or will it come peacefully? I answer not only out of belief, but out of conviction. The world of tomorrow must be a society based on nonviolence. And here, plain page would say non-killing. So a road towards that, a hands of peace for the world, you know. And the book, your book itself is about the hands of peace to the world. So to help the world fight against the gruesome result of violence, I think the Encyclopedia will have its place in the consciousness of those who love peace and wanted to do away with it. Now, the source of this keynote is here. I will leave this with the organizers. So, hands of peace in Asia. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and sawadee krap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Amazing stuff. And I really hope that we can find a way to engage with the world, precisely at this time with all that's happening around us. I mean, the hands of peace have never, always seen it happen, never thought about the importance of what the gestures are and how we've got to educate the world. And I guess that's the bigger challenge that we face, all of you great minds that have given so much thought to these concepts. It's we've got 10 minutes for the speaker from Africa, my own home continent. And for that, I'd love to call on Nozizwe Madlala-Routledge, the former Minister of Defense for South Africa and who recently became Director of Quaker United Nations Office in Geneva. Madam, I know you're there and I saw you 2 seconds ago. Anyway, it's over to you, please.
I started talking too soon.
Yes.
But I want to greet all of you from Geneva. And in the spirit of cultural nonviolence that we've just heard about, I would like to greet you in my mother tongue and say Sanibonani, which means we see you, my people see you. Even though often I'm alone greeting you and you are alone, I convey to you that we are a community. My community sees your community. And that to me builds on the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are. So thank you so much for inviting me to say a few words at the launch of the Encyclopedia on Violence, Peace and Conflict. As an African Quaker, it is a great privilege. I now work as director of the Quaker United Nations office here in Geneva, where we collaborate with people in the United Nations. I think there was mention of the United Nations just now. They're just a stone's throw away from where I'm sitting. We also work with other multilateral organizations, government delegations, and non-governmental organizations to achieve changes in international policy, standards, and practice. So for that reason, I really would encourage us in the various levels at which we work to get hold of a copy of the encyclopedia. Thanks are due to you, Lester Kurtz, who brought together 260 articles by expert authors, some of whom are joining us this afternoon here in Geneva, morning in the US, evening in the East. I said earlier, I hope the United Nations uses this resource in its effort to implement the Secretary General's Antonio Guterres' vision called Our Common Agenda. This is a vision of the future of global cooperation through an inclusive, networked, and effective multilateralism. I know even as I say this, we are all wondering whether multilateralism is indeed working. And I think it is for us all to work together to make it work. Talking about wars, which was mentioned earlier when we started, the World Population Review using the EuPRA data program definition shows a map of the world with 20 countries highlighted as at war in 2022, and 14 of those are in Africa. The map does not yet show the war between Russia and the Ukraine. There are also conflicts between and within countries, which make the countries dysfunctional, such as those resulting from coup d'etats, illegal trade, and corruption. I bring you the words of Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah, who we all know, said, Africa is a paradox which illustrates and highlights neocolonialism. Her earth is rich, yet the products that come from above and below her soil continue to enrich not Africans, but groups of individuals who operate to Africa's impoverishment, unquote. This puts wars in Africa into context. And to continue on this track, I want to quote Amina Mama and Margot Okazawa Ray, who wrote in the journal Feminist Africa, who said, and I quote, my computer is very sensitive, so it tends to move before I've moved it. So I'm quoting Amina Mama and Margot Okazawa Ray, who said, and I quote, The African continent pursued political independence more than half a century ago, seeking freedom to overcome colonial legacies of military pacification and iron-fisted colonial governments characterized by administrative tyranny, economic exploitation, socio-cultural repression, and all the dynamics that perpetrated underdevelopment and the extreme marginalization of African women from mainstream economics. So they carry on to tell us that this legacy continues up to today in Africa. So even though the global context into which Africa's new nations emerged did not do much to overcome these legacies, on the contrary, individual nations found themselves variously enmeshed in Cold War politics and the arms race and embroiled in a series of deadly proxy wars, which in fact continues. As we know, Africa often finds ourselves caught in the middle. So apart from the destabilization and destruction to life and the environment, war always results in an escalation of arms transfers and other social ills. Speaking at the Council on Christian Approaches to Defense and Disarmament in a paper entitled, I quote, Small Arms Exports, Leadership and Accountability, a Human Rights Perspective, our CUNO rep on peace and disarmament at the United Nations had this to say. She said, importantly for this conversation, we understand peace as more than the absence of war and the need to look for what seeds of war there may be in all social, political, and economic relationships. And worth also noting is that as a pacifist organization, a quietly subversive one, we do continue to resist all war and preparations for war and believe that the deliberate killing of others denies their humanity, unquote. She explains how we at CUNO navigate this radical nonviolence position in the challenging UN reality of multilateralism and geopolitics. She says, and while keeping that radicalism close to our hearts, our work sometimes does call on us to navigate creatively and at times subversively the realities of UN multilateralism and geopolitics, first and foremost to prevent the West harm by addressing and curbing the impact of weapons on human rights beyond the right to life, and engaging with a wide range of actors, including the economic drivers of these exports, namely the businesses behind the bullets. The hope is, of course, to enhance leadership, to think the world otherwise, unquote. Not having looked at all the articles in the 3 editions of the encyclopedia, I will be looking for answers to the following questions and situations. How will we transform the arms industries to make peace, not supply arms? How will we transform armies to use all the resources in this encyclopedia to wage peace and not war? In 1999, I was appointed Deputy Minister of Defense of South Africa. I was given only minutes to make a decision. After discernment, as Quakers would say, I accepted, since the Defense Review had concluded that there was no external military threat to South Africa in the foreseeable future. One newspaper said this appointment was either a stroke of genius or a monumental gaffe. I choose to assume it was the former, and as I helped lead the South African National Defense Force into Africa as part of our peacekeeping missions, a role that South Africa continued to play, I prayed every day that South Africa was never at war. Based on the human security paradigm, I introduced the African Women's Peace Table as a way of looking at peace through a gender lens. This program continues to this day, and a general commented, who had attended one of these events, that it liberated him to think of war and peace in a new way. I fully supported the Quaker statement on peace in Africa, which said South Africa had no external enemies but poverty, unemployment, ill health, and inequality. I battled with the concept that if you want peace, you must prepare for war. I thought it was more logical to say that if you want peace, prepare for peace. My advisor once said to me at a dinner that he thought our ministry should be called the Ministry of Peace. I'm intrigued to see that Professor Jeff Harris has proposed the concept of the Ministries of Peace for Southern Africa, which is aimed at building a culture of peace. Jeff says it identifies broad functions and 9 specific tasks which such ministries would undertake. It notes 4 objections to such a ministry and attempts to answer these. There are currently 5 countries with such ministries. The Solomon Islands, Nepal, Costa Rica, South Sudan, and Timor-Leste, which were established in quite different circumstances and with different purposes. Are you calling me to round off?
Wrap up, if you don't mind, yes, thank you.
Okay, I am getting there, but I'm really sending a lot of gratitude and thanks to Lester Kurtz for having put this very important resource together. And I encourage all of those involved in peace negotiations, in developing international policy, to look at this resource as they do so. I wish I had this encyclopedia, just like the earlier speaker said, on my shelf right now as I speak to you and as I engage from CUNO with the United Nations. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts with everybody, and we hope that the CUNO will obtain this encyclopedia and ensure that the rest of the United Nations gets it. But we will be looking at opportunities to spread the word and counting on you to help in doing that. I will invite next Dr. Daniela Irrera from Italy, from the University of Catania. I am almost certain I saw you. Yes, there you are. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's over to you, Irrera.
Yeah, thank you so much. And sorry, I really apologize for getting so late. But the problem is I was not able to join into the Zoom link. So just 2 seconds for say thank you so much to Lester Kurtz for inviting me. Well, indeed, in few minutes, because I have about 10 minutes, it's very hard to summarize the state of the art of the research on peace and conflict in Europe. And I can say very, very briefly that as part of the European Peace Research Association, I'm the president of such organization. I'm very honored about that. We have obviously focused on research on conflict and conflict resolution, conflict management, but also conflict transformation and peace. But especially about peace, we have been focusing on how peace education can be relevant, especially at universities, at schools, and how this can enhance more dialogue and the use of particular active learning tools as simulations and games, and how these practices can help in enhancing education at university, but also the different kinds of actors which are involved in the peace promotion. So either governmental actors, but most frequently, obviously, non-state actors, so particularly NGOs and other civil society organizations. And myself, I'm a specialist in NGOs. I can also say that in these last years, the state of the art on in Europe has focused a lot on how the humanitarian system is changing, and it is something that we need to focus on because obviously the COVID-19 outbreak has caused disruptions, instability everywhere in Europe and across the world, but it was very clear and visible how European states were absolutely not well equipped to face the health issues, but also the political and social and economic implications that were related to the COVID-19. And so the point is that we still need to focus on two main things. So first of all, how or whether democratic and well-developed states, as European states are expected to be, are still willing or equipped to face major crises. Obviously not if we consider what is happening right now in Ukraine. But not only in respect to war and conflicts, but also in respect to crises like the pandemic, and also the social and humanitarian implications of such crises. And so this is this is the first thing. So the second one is to what extent the global humanitarian system is still able to manage the effects of crisis, particularly to help vulnerable people who are exposed to the effects of conflict, the prevention. And this is particularly true because if you look at the global humanitarian system, it has been shaped by by states, European states, together with the US. So let's say the Western states. So the European states, either as individual states or a part of institutions like obviously the European Union or the United Nations, or most recently NATO, I mean, as part of different forms of cooperation, had a strong responsibility in the ways through which the humanitarian system has tried to manage the current crisis. And I'm referring obviously to the pandemic, but also to what we have seen in the past. So conflict crises like Syria, Yemen, Mali, the management of the US's engagement in Afghanistan, the refugee crisis, the migrant and refugee crisis, which was a real crisis for European states, and I also to the new vulnerable people. So we have new kinds of vulnerabilities. I'm referring to those categories which are obviously always been considered as vulnerable. So people, civilians in conflict, civilians in deprived areas of the world, migrant refugees, but also we need to consider the effects of undemocratic and very illiberal or brutal political regimes, as for example, before the war in Ukraine and after during the pandemic, let's say, we have also faced, for example, mass protests in Belarus or Kazakhstan, which have been brutally repressed in the heart of Europe or in the Eurasia area. This means that there's a lot of empirical data on which we can reflect, and also lots of topics that we still need to analyze and stress, particularly also for producing policy prescriptions. So we see that our democratic system, which was expected to be strong and able to build responses to conflict, to the spread of conflict, to the spread of crisis, is absolutely not well equipped, not able to produce such responses. And also what we see in Europe after the war in Ukraine broke up, is that democracies are at risk as well, because democracy should be democracy is a very important component of peace. I'm not referring to liberal peace, which is obviously a paradigm which has been contested, discussed, but also contested. I'm referring to those paradigms which are most, let's say, innovative, maybe like hybrid peace. So the fact that there were reflections on how peace can be, or different kinds of peace can be brought into areas in which democratic institutions are very, very difficult to be built, but also protected. At the same time, if we are not able to protect civilians, to protect a brutal attack, which was the first military attack in Europe since several years, this means that something really does not work in the way through which the humanitarian system, the democratic system, the security system have been created and consolidated so far. So I stop here because I really just wanted to give some ideas on the kind of reflections that we have been carrying out so far, and also the future perspectives that can be expressed in the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniela. And for the first time, I saw some people clapping. I'm not sure exactly why, but the beauty of your presentation obviously must have spurred them to do this maybe. I have to move on to a region not far from where I am presently, and that would be to Latin America. But just before I do that, you'd indulge me, I'll call on Thomas Defren and give him a minute to say something from the European perspective. Yes.
Do I have a mic? Yes. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Lester and team, for the invitation to join me for this celebration of the launch of the new edition of this encyclopedia that shares worldwide new perspectives to our field. I'm very thankful. I'd like to share with you the impressions of my country and my region mostly. And so it's a bit of switch of what we have been hearing during these presentations. When we had these questions about what do we know about violence, peace, and conflicts, well, I like to speak about these topics in the everyday life and what we are experiences here. When I think about what we know, I always question myself about who are we? Are we the academics, researchers, students, practitioners, or are we people, just ordinary people that developed an intense commitment to ourselves to share the findings of our experiences at the universities, at the fields, everywhere, so we can make a difference, to do our bit to have a better world. And we know at all levels is that we all can experience violences and conflicts, but it's not so usual to experience peace. Why? Maybe because we cannot recognize the little nuances of peace during the day-to-day life, and I find it somehow unfair. Conflicts and violence have been marketing, as Lester pointed out earlier, better press, better attention of us. We have seen it recently during a film event that only 30 seconds of a violent scene have shadowed a number of kind gestures and well-deserved recognitions during all the night. So I think we have to focus more on peace acts, visibilize them, encourage them, empower them, make them be replicated all over. And what do we still need to know? We need to know better that maybe our structure of thinking is still designing in the violent patterns of the ancient times. And we need to be aware of that, to face it and to change it. What do we need to do? Perhaps we should begin to think of ourselves, of subjects of study, and our personal contribution to conflicts, to violence, to peace, and how to strengthen the culture of peace. In the organization, Answer for Peace, we have this practice of the 3 C's, which are the 3 C's for better coexistence. More than 12 years ago, we developed this concept. And the 3 C's are consideration, comprehension, and caring. We propose that if we take a personal project of 3 weeks of the 3 C's, after that we can evaluate results. How do we feel, and if we notice a change in others towards us. So the 3 C's that we work on, and I share with you, is consideration, to take people into account and treating them with respect. But I mean people that is very near us, neighbors or people that we are really close. Comprehension, to understand the meaning of what is said or done and its implication, because maybe we are failing in this kind of communication skills. And caring is the 3rd C, to preserve, assist, conserve. It refers to oneself and others, even if they are unknown parties, people. Trying not to hurt. I think that that's very, very important, is to find ways to working that are successful and supportive for peace. I think that these 3 C's means a change of mind towards the others, whether you know him or not. So it's sort of recover the sense of a peaceful coexistence. This encyclopedia can help us, all of us, with new insights, findings, tools to support and strengthen the culture of peace. So, well, I don't know if I have more time, but maybe we can have later on some questions.
Thank you.
I speak about my region, but yeah. I think that many regions can recognize this sort of situations.
Absolutely, Dr. Daniela, Eugenia. What you said, of course, applies to just about every region. We will hear from your neighbors to the north, whether this is the case or not. But thank you so much for your presentation. I know we're running 10 minutes beyond, we're running out of time, or I'm not sure what Professor Kurtz is going to say to me after this, but I will invite our next speaker, who will speak on the North American experience. And that will be Professor Alison Renteland from the University of Southern California, who's, as you all know, is a renowned expert on international law, comparative law, and human rights. I think you're there, Professor, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Sure, we can hear you and see you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about this important publication that will raise awareness of so many important issues. I'll speak a bit about the North American experience, but I was hoping to address human rights more generally, because the North American record, at least in the United States, on human rights is fairly depressing and embarrassing, if I may say so. The United States has not ratified some of the major human rights instruments that could help to minimize or stop violence. We're the only country, the United States is the only country that hasn't ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the US still needs to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the American Convention on Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and so on. So the North American experience with treaty ratification is discouraging, but there is some room for hope. We had a great victory at having the first woman of color, the first Black woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court. And so there's hope that maybe with more women involved in interpreting these standards that there can be progress. So I think the focus I was hoping to take was more about the role of human rights in limiting violence, and that's not limited only to the United States, where we've of course had terrible problems with police brutality and killings and systemic racism, but the human rights perspective needs to be global. It should not just be from a North American perspective. We've seen greater attention to intersectional approaches and third world approaches to international law. So if we look at the North American experience, as I say, it's something that's deplorable with regard to police violence, not having come to terms with the enslavement of people and so forth. But I think there is some room for optimism about the use of human rights to limit violence. First of all, there's been a decline in doctrines of immunity recognized in the United States and in other parts of the world. And so that means that despots who commit genocide or who are responsible for disappeared people will be held accountable. So that's one thing that is important in this era. We also see paradigm shifts in the treatment of human rights. For example, the attack on the public-private distinction, so that if violence occurs, for example, if women experience domestic violence or any kind of attacks in the workplace, in religious institutions, there's state accountability. So that shift, I think, has been very important in the emergence of human rights standards. Professor Rebecca Cook in Canada is one of the pioneers in this area of gender jurisprudence. Another important paradigm shift has been with respect to disability rights, the rejection of the medical model. And so this new treaty, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, another that the United States needs to ratify, is a tool to protect persons with disabilities from cruelty and violence and institutionalization. So I think the importance of human rights as part of this study of violence is in noting some of the changes that we've seen. For example, with the International Criminal Court having very explicit terms for dealing with sexual violence, listing, for instance, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, and enforced sterilization. So this should permit more prosecution for this wider range of offenses, sexual and gender-based. And we've seen some successes in prosecution. For example, Bosco Ntaganda of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Another development has been the recognition of mass rape as genocide and a crime against humanity in the International Tribunal, Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And so I think there's been an important development in recognizing that violence against women is something that the international community can tackle and prevent. There have been special rapporteurs appointed on violence against women. And so I think there's some reason for optimism with regard to the use of human rights standards to limit violence. I think ultimately the issue is political will, and I think one of the virtues of this volume of this important collection of essays is looking at the social and political context of violence, because there often are formal laws on the books, but they're not put into practice. And so there needs to be the political will to enforce these laws, both domestic and international, to protect people, vulnerable people from violence. And I think in this moment when there's this global consensus that Russia has blatantly disregarded international law, the fact that there's a consensus that this is unacceptable, I think can give us hope that violence could be limited. And the fact that more women are playing leadership roles in the interpretation of these norms is another reason for that. I think another feature of the scholarship that we have before us involves the role of technology and seeing different ways in which social movements are empowered through technological innovation, that these can empower civil society and members of the public to document examples of violence. And so I think that even though there's, in the face of terrible tragedy and violence, I think the contributions of social scientists can be very important in helping to show new approaches to enforcing rules to limit these horrendous acts of violence. So I guess I'm hoping that the scholarship of the kind that is part of this important encyclopedia will change the way people think about violence and give people new tools to help with the enforcement of standards that exist. So we have plenty of sort of rules on the books, but we need to have the ability to move forward with prosecutions. I think young people are often very impatient for international institutions to work more effectively. And I think with better documentation and better methodological approaches that we can train people, we can have greater success in these efforts to enforce standards to limit or halt violence. So thank you very much. I don't want to take up any more time, but I appreciate this chance to participate.
Thank you so much, Professor Özerdem. And once again, I see folks clapping, which I didn't see. Well, looks like it's a gender thing. When the women speak, men tend to be very happy. But we've come to an interesting point in this morning's program. We'll be moving on to we'll have questions and answers in 1 second, but just before we do that, we'll be moving on to sessions, to breakout sessions, and I would love to call on Professor Turpin, Jennifer Turpin, who's with the University of San Francisco, and I know you're there, yes, to just take a minute or two to explain the breakout groups, the 4 of them. You'll do that, and then we will quickly do a 5-minute Q&A, and I'll call on Matt Mayer to ask the first question. So please prepare that so that we can run into the walk when we come back. So if Jennifer's there, please turn on your mic and tell us about the breakout session.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be part of this important gathering of committed scholars and to participate in these stimulating discussions and to hear these wonderful presentations. We will, after the brief question and answers, we will move into breakout sessions, into groups for about 30 minutes. And each group will be hosted by a student host as well as a rapporteur who will guide and facilitate the discussion and keep notes. So you can pick your breakout group based on these subject areas that are shown on the screen. So please take a moment to look at the groups. There are 10 of them. You'll see who's hosting, and you'll see the subject areas for each group. And if you would select your group, then you will be able to choose a breakout group when we move into them in a few minutes.
I think we'll leave that on the screen for a second and then go on to the Q&A. And as I said, essentially the questions, of course, will go to the speakers, but you could also address anybody in the group, you want to, you're seeking a response from. So let me call on Mahatma, and I said this, I hope you have that, the question that was launched this part of the process. Over to you, Matt. Is it your microphone that's not on? Well, I am not sure why we're unable to get Matt Mayer, but does anyone else have a question you'd want to address to anybody specifically, or to any member of the group of speakers that we've listened to, the keynote speakers?
So, or should I write it in the box?
Please go ahead, and yes, or just no, you can ask your question. Just turn on your microphone and ask.
Yes, I would like to know how, because you spoke first about the concept of Sangha, or the community. And now we hear of what some 50, 60 people are now a community. And how do we, and I know the book itself has many more people in that community, but how do we build upon this community?
Great question, Sama. Can you just quickly tell us who you are? Just a quick, introduction to yourself. Where are you coming from?
Yeah, I am, although I am originally Californian, but I met Lester. He was my professor and my master's advisor and a great mentor about 10, 12 years ago in Austria. And
okay,
a good friend.
Yeah. You want to address your question to anybody specifically, or to all of the faculty?
Everybody.
Oh,
anybody.
Okay. Well, it's open.
Somebody
then.
has raised their hand to answer.
Sure. Please.
Few people have answered.
So who's taking the question? Nozizwe? Oh, who did you see?
I see Thomas Daffern and Jonathan Feldman have raised their hand to answer.
Great. Thomas, please.
No, I wasn't answering that question. Or I can take it. I had a question of my own, but I'll do both at once. So my question is about the new dimensions of violence in Lester's brilliant introduction, based on Galtung's work and others. We've heard about the types of violence. Here in Europe, we've suffered an information war, a cyber war. Russia launched its attack on Ukraine with a total cyber war, which was done against Western Europe for the last 10 years. This is not something they've just done. If you read Professor Timothy Snyder's book, The Road to Unfreedom, Brexit was part of the information war by Russia. So this is a whole new type of warfare. information warfare and the war of ideas. My question is, how can the non-violence community adjust to information war, which I think is the new normal? And I think this is, I don't know if it's even got into the encyclopedia, if not, please in the next edition. So that's my question. I suppose it's to Lester and everyone else that's spoken so far.
Okay, Professor Kurtz, would you want to just quickly react to that, and then anybody else can, the new dimensions of violence?
Oh, that's a really great point. In fact, a friend of mine who does military sociology said that the most important thing in the next war is information. And there is some dealing with that in the encyclopedia. I can't recall right offhand which article has it, but I know that there is some attention to that issue in the encyclopedia. And if you send me an email, I'll try to find it and send it to you.
Should I say something? Can I say?
Oh, Eric, now your microphone is muted.
No, yes. Sorry. After hand, please go ahead.
Since I am seeing the new normal of the violence in the modern time, if I am taking the example of the South Asia, for instance, the media and the other kind of the social media, they are adding too much to the kind of the misperception among the people, and that is resulting to a violent situation throughout the countries of South Asia or the other places. And some misinformation that Professor Thomas Duffin mentioned earlier, that this cyber warfare or this kind of this technological, that warfare to create some perception or to create some false narratives that is culminating into the violence. So my question or my observation is that it is very important to tackle such kind of the narratives and make some kind of the resolution or some kind of the solution for that matters. Thank you.
Professor Ruslan or Nozizwe, would you want to react to some of the questions that have been asked?
Yes, thank you so much. I do like this question, especially because of the devastating impact of misinformation and the over-reliance of people generally on fast news through social media. I would emphasize the importance of truth and information, which I think this encyclopedia provides. So I want to link this answer I'm providing to the question about building community. And in this case, I would say, for example, if one of you, now that I know you, told me something, I would believe you because you are part of this community and I know your aim is to build peace. If I get a request from Matt Mayer, for example, to speak to you, I know I should come forward because I trust him. I trust the information he gives me. So I think we should all take the responsibility to spread truth. I think it's the only vaccine to this virus. It's truth. Let's spread the truth.
Okay. Thank you. Professor Ruslan?
Thank you. I think the questions are provocative. I do think building a community would be terrific, with a listserv and maybe an organized research section in the Law and Society Association. So if we were to take the group into perhaps some larger structure like Law and Society or perhaps something else, that might work well. Or there's the International Institute for the Sociology of Law at Oñati, something that under which our group could be housed, so to speak. I also agree about the point regarding social media. I don't think that the distribution or dissemination of disinformation, misinformation is new. There's always been propaganda, but it's the way it's disseminated so quickly through the internet. And so it seems to me part of this, the response to the question is for us to consider what kind of liability there should be for the companies that host the platforms that circulate the false information and the violence. In the United States, there's been renewed interest in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And so I think, to me, there seems to be an important question of how to hold accountable those who circulate the information, something that I don't think is settled in the law. And then a related point is that I think the question of incitement to violence or incitement to genocide, which is covered under international law, is also part of what we need to be concerned with when people use false information and false narratives to try to foment violence. And so I've been very concerned about that. And it's certainly been an issue since the Nuremberg trial. So I think the concerns about the misuse of information and the demonization of groups for purposes of violence and genocide, I think is not new, but the risks and the dangers posed by the ability of people to circulate the information so quickly is what should give us pause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Anklin. We will, evolve now and go into the breakout sessions. What I'd love to do is have Professor Turpin again explain to us exactly how we're going to break up into these groups and what exactly those groups are.
Thank you. Thank you. So if everyone has selected their group, I believe Seville is going to do the mechanics. Is that correct, Les, of putting people into the groups?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay. And how do they indicate to you which group they want to be in?
I'm just going to create the breakout group. They can choose and just enter to that. If they are ready, I can do that.
Okay. So if everyone has made note of the breakout group you'd like to join, based on the group numbers here, just write down your group number. You'll see the rapporteur and the subject areas. And then once you've selected your group, you'll be able to opt into that group as soon as Seville makes that option available.
If they are ready, I can open now.
Okay.
Okay.
You can also go to another group if there are not enough people for a group.
Right.
Now they receive the invitation, so they can choose their group and just start entering to them.
Can we have another 3 hours? More time.
Yeah,
No.
we need more time.
Who set this?
Perfect.
Yeah, we didn't conclude our discussion in breakout groups.
Oh my God.
It can only be dim sum. It cannot be real, We can just get so many tastes.
We just got started.
Yeah.
What do we do, Professor Kurtz?
We also just got started. Actually, we achieved a lot, but we would have liked more time because we just entered an interesting conversation about Honduras.
Well, you're in charge, Eric.
No, it's we've got 10, 15 more minutes, which we can put to good use, I suppose. And my suggestion would be if some of the rapporteurs and each of the group had someone, I think, could give us a quick sense of what was discussed, and then we can then begin to look at some possible next steps.
I think actually technically we have until noon, so we can have a more general discussion for those who are able to stay.
Yeah. So the different groups, could we have some? Okay, looks like Janet wants to say something on behalf of the group. You've got to unmute your mic.
I'm saying also goodbye to my partner in the room, Aslam Khan. Thank you, and see you. I'll try to represent what you said. We had a very small group, and Jay Robinson was the recorder. So if I leave something out, you're invited to add. But just very briefly, I'll say, and of course we had a range of knowledge. So I'll start with the last thing. Pooja said, well, is war the answer? Can war solve problems? And I think that's like it's not just a question, it's the query. It's a lifetime problematic that we get sucked into and pulled out of. And in our group, we divided along the lines of talking about our humanity and how humanity can unite around values, as Aslam Khan said, like Gandhian values, nonviolent values that help us restrain from war violence and bring out the, who was it, Diana, who spoke about caring and listening and responding on a social, interpersonal, and human level. And at the same time, we spoke about the security level. And sometimes we say we or they, but who are we talking about? On the security level, it's the states, the nation states, the great powers. And we could say the corporate powers that drive what's happening. And sometimes we as people feel unable to intervene and more the victims of that. And that especially now, this idea of weapons and nuclear proliferation is profoundly threatening in this moment and terrifying with this spread of the war in Ukraine, and which countries feel destabilized and about to lose something so that they might enter into the armed conflict. And that brought us back to the level of identity and how identity plays into, as patriots, as whatever our particular issues and activist identities are, or our academic disciplines are, how do identities divide us, and how can we transcend that at the same time? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And your group seems to have really dug into the issues, and we congratulate you. I will look at the other groups. I know there is one. Yes.
Can I say something since I have to leave? Can I?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So I am Vidya Jain. I am from group 4. And our major concern was cultural dimension to psychological interventions and gender studies. But majorly, there were 4 presentations, all focusing on this issue of gender issues, except Adrian Needs, who looks at this gender problem from a man's perspective. He talked about the serial killers and how this masculinity can be a devastating factor. It is derailment. It is, it is something psychopathic, which I fully agree to him, because all the men who indulges into sexual violence, domestic violence, I see them as derailed, devastated, and something has been very, very wrong with them in their childhood. They must have suffered a lot, and that this socializing, this stereotyping, this conditioning of them make them so violent men, and they indulges into domestic violence. So I'm very happy that this group was really, the first presentation by was Priska, who comes from Indonesia. She's an old friend of mine, and she studied this post-COVID thing. And what interesting thing she mentioned was that these young mothers now could not relate to their children as it was 30 years back. So because today's youth, and especially the women youth, is less into this, mothering thing. They are differently, culturally different now. So it is a big challenge, because I always value women because she is a mother, she is a creator, she is mother of men. So it's very, very interesting. But she thought it is a challenge now that these young girls of today's time they feel hard to become mothers and to relate to their children. As we were mothers, it was easier, you know. There was a presentation by Saira, which I really liked. She studied in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sierra, and she says it is very difficult to go to grassroots and open up questions to women, because women normally just dissociate themselves. They don't answer. They don't want to become part of this field work, the grassroots work. So her challenge was how to bring data from these women. And I can understand this because I come from Indian society. When I go to villages, women don't open up. They, and especially if the research is of women, it becomes much more difficult because the whole cultural feudal dimensions come into picture, you know. So I really found that this, and A.D. Rentin was there. She was talking about this, the pathetic situation which is appearing now, because we would be amazed to understand that violence against women has actually increased, you know. The whole liberal, these conception of peace and non-violence are spreading, but share for women into this gender justice is on a decline. I can authenticate this from my own cultural experience, and especially in this post-COVID era, the violence against women, sexual violence, eve-teasing, molestation, gang rape, sexual violence has increased tremendously, and women is not finding a way, you know. She's a 50% of this population. And then I really want to relate to what Chaiwat Satha-Anand said in his keynote when he was talking about hands. He was talking about individuals. I also want to bring Gandhi into this discourse. Until and unless you design a new man, a new woman, a new individual, nothing can be done. You can make laws, you can make systemic changes, but until and unless you sensitize this man how to behave with a woman who is mother to him. I mean, she's Gandhi says women is incarnation of non-violence. She's epitome of love and compassion. How she has become object of lust in this recent phase, recent area is really very, very alarming. So let her transfer this love, this mother, you know, who forgets all the pain in delivering the child. Let her transfer this love to the whole of humanity, and let her forget that she can ever be object of man's lust. So rise above your sexuality, Gandhi says, I'm again quoting Gandhi, rise above your sexuality, masculinity and femininity, and work as friends, comrades and colleagues for the wider interests of society. So when Chaiwat was saying, you know, talking, do I have some time to say, or shall I wind up?
Maybe maybe another 30 seconds if you don't mind. Yeah, please.
Your mischievous smile is asking me to stop, so I thought, sure. So I just want to just end up here. When Chaiwat was talking, I'm so happy that he brought Gandhi so extensively in his discourse, because I also believe, I'm a student of Gandhi, that until unless Gandhi is brought forefront in all the studies, in all the curriculum, nothing can be done. No society of peace, no culture of peace can be restored. If you ask me what should be done, because there were three questions: what we have done, what research, no knowledge. We have to do one thing. We have to address this individual mindset, his attitude, his, you know, and especially I'm talking in the context of women's issues, this designing a strong, firm, loving, compassionate women and a sensitive, humane, friendly, comradely, loving men. These two can make a way to the social justice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vidya. I guess the big question now is, how do we get there? You know, and maybe some thinking should go into that, and that's precisely what Group 1 tried to do, looking at the what we know and about conflict theories, but they didn't delve into it because there was a very interesting discussion apparently on happiness, gross national happiness, and Sonam had the chance to enlighten everybody on that. So do you want to just very quickly, maybe in a minute, give a brief of what the focus was in that group, what the discussion came out with. Your microphone is, you've got to unmute it and just give us a quick summary of.
Good morning once again, everybody. I have had the opportunity. First of all, before I forget, I would like to thank Professor Kurtz for the opportunity that you extended to me and my two other authors to contribute a chapter. And we feel really honored and privileged to be a part of your book. And in addition to that, I would also like to thank you for giving this opportunity to be present in today's launch program. Having said so, in the group that we had, that was group number 1, I was asked to 3 specific questions on gross national happiness. And the first question that I was asked was what is meant by happiness in Bhutan? And when we talk about happiness in Bhutan, we always have GNH, gross national happiness, in mind. So in Bhutan, happiness is gross national happiness, a concept that was coined or born out of our 4th king, His Majesty King Jigme Singye Wangchu, in 1972. He said that for Bhutan, for a country like Bhutan, gross national happiness is more important than gross domestic product. But when he said so, he did not mean to abandon the concept of gross domestic product. What he said was, gross domestic product is important, but it is only an element of gross national happiness. So gross national happiness is conceived to be a more holistic, inclusive, and sustainable way of in the way that a country can progress, and thereby is people achieving happiness and well-being. The other question that somebody from that group raised was how far social media, what kind of a role social media plays in, the reference was made to, I guess, violence in 1 or 2 families in Bhutan that occurred during the lockdown, the recent lockdowns. And his question was, how far is social media impactful in projecting the violence in a country or in a family? My question was, I said I have been out of Bhutan for the last 10 years, and as much as he knows or hears is what I hear or know about the violence in my country. But all that I know is from social media, people posting on Facebook saying that such and such family, there was such and such violence. So while I do not agree that there has been a lot of violence due to the lockdowns in the Buddhist families, but there have been a few cases of violence within the family arising from a number of factors. One, when people are under lockdown, I mean, there's a lot of frustration. The second reason they probably could have arisen, the violence that could have arisen was out of economic difficulties. I have heard of cases where people had no essential commodities in some of the remote villages where there were no nearby shops, no access to electricity, and all kinds of problems were there. But they are just a few among a population of close to 800 million. So what is being projected on social media about the violence in Bhutan due to the recent lockdown is not 100%, it does not depict the 100% truth. That was the second question that I have had to answer. There was one more question. What was that? Can you remember, Professor Eric?
Go ahead, Sonam.
What was the third question? Somebody asked me a third question. Oh, yes. What, I mean, by happiness, how do we actually define happiness? And I said, happiness in the context of GNH is not to be understood as a momentary sense of delight or joy. Someone giving you a gift, making you happy. That we do not call it happiness in Bhutan. Somebody taking you out for a dinner, we do not call it as a happiness. Happiness in Bhutan is something that has that conveys a deep sense of contentment. Now, if people are able to enjoy good health facilities, if people have access to good health facilities, if people have access to good quality education, if people are able to use their time wisely in a productive manner, if people are living in a society, if somebody living in a society and has a very good enjoys a good community vitality in the sense of group community cohesiveness, vibrancy, I mean, then we say that people lead. We say that there is happiness. It's a sustained sense of contentment, not a momentary sense of joy or delight. So these were the three questions that I answered. Right or wrong, I have had to speak something and I spoke something. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Sonam. And okay, you were part of group 1. Do we go to group 2, group 3, or any of the groups, please? I know we ended up not finding ourselves in the groups in which we were initially assigned. But does anybody want to tell us what was discussed in another group?
I'm in group 2. Shall I go?
We'll let you if nobody else wants to speak at this moment. Okay, Prof, you have it.
I'll try to be quick, although it's very difficult. And Jonathan Freeman Jonathan Feldman can chime in if I don't get it very accurately. Our topics were history and public health, and we actually came up with a really interesting connection between the two. What happened was Jonathan had written the chapter on economic conversion in the Encyclopedia, and it turns out that that's actually kind of a link between our different topics of history and public health, because if we think of what are the historical lessons that we've learned, and what do they have to do with things like public health and other aspects of our discussion. So if we can convert our economic systems, which is actually a follow-up from gross national happiness as well. If we can convert our economic systems so that they're producing food, they're producing the basic needs for people, and if we can find ways of addressing those kinds of issues, Jonathan talked about, first of all, Eisenhower. He said, here's the summary: Eisenhower, Mellman, Abbie Hoffman, and Simone Weil. That's too brief a summary, but let me give you one example from that. President Eisenhower gave this incredible speech on the military-industrial complex and warned everybody about it as he retired from being the head of commander of Allied forces in Europe at the end of World War II and became president of the United States. So he had this really sentient warning to everybody about the power of the military industrial complex and how it shaped our economy and our lives and so on. But then Seymour Mellman pointed out that Eisenhower, in fact, sort of gave birth to the military industrial complex in his own administration. So here's that ambivalence again that I was talking about earlier. So we need all kinds of things. And Actually, Jonathan should be giving this summary rather than me because most of the good ideas were his. And one other important contributor, Maya. Maya was there. First of all, she didn't show herself because her baby was sleeping. She had her baby there. Baby woke up, and Maya and her baby showed up in our session quite appropriately because we're doing it for the babies also. And she brought up the issue of food and the problem of food, and it reminded me of one of the high priorities in my thinking about violence is actually the problem of malnutrition. This is the prime example of structural violence, that every 2 years, according to UNICEF, every 2 years, as many children die of malnutrition and related causes as the Nazis killed in the entire Holocaust. If we spent the money that we spend on defending ourselves, obviously military invasion is not a moot point, but if we spent money on feeding people, on meeting basic needs, if we can somehow also delink, as Maya pointed out, the problem of food as capital rather than nutrition. So if we can make some of these conversions of our basic institutions, that would be also some of the groundwork for peace. And we have plenty of historical examples of how it doesn't work to allow concentration, the people with concentrated power to make decisions. So my final comment is that, well, we have to mobilize alternative sources of power that counter this incredible concentration of capital and power among a very small group of people, most of them white men, and I can say that, most of them white men, and try to mobilize some kinds of resistance to that. So I don't know what I've missed, but I'll come back.
Wonderful.
Briefly, I put in 2 links that follow up on things that we kind of discussed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Are these links available to all, or are they going to be shared after this conference?
I'm trying to. Well, we can save. I'm saving the chat. We can save the chat at the end of the session, and I'm setting up a site, a website, and I'll put in the link to that again, and we can also submit some written reports to that. So this will try to be a resource. I'll put in that link again in a moment.
I'd like to, if anyone wants to go ahead, please, or I can tell about our group.
Jonathan Greenberg.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to briefly talk about our group. I just want to say at the beginning that we had an excellent conversation. We just began and we could have gone much more deeply if we had time. I'm sure that's true for everyone. Our conversation was very sober and sobering. And it began by reflections from Professor Feldman, Gordy, who many of you know was, who really founded and led the Peace Studies program at Brandeis. Mm-hmm. And he reflected over, we talked about the academy and the role of our role as researchers and scholars. And Gordy made some, and I'm going to briefly summarize, but observed that over his years, there's been both positive and negative things that have happened. On the positive side, of course, there's been many changes in American society, from the civil rights movement to the women's movement to the LGBTQ movement, that have had very positive impacts transforming the university. But on the other hand, there's been a backlash to all of that. And there's been an increasing corporatization, privatization of the university system, so that the sort of free market knowledge for sale model, consumerism in the way people think about the university and the way students are thinking about getting high paying jobs, and all of those things have a negative impact on what we're doing, as well as sort of the narrow focus on disciplines and the way that people get tenure, and all of these things make it in certain ways more difficult for scholars to make impactful research. And then Professor Turpin echoed that and talked about how, in terms of priorities, the core focus of research about the military-industrial complex and the structural violence that we see in society, we've had lots of research that has been very illuminating about those structures. On the other hand, we really have failed to successfully mobilize the impact of our scholarship to really make much of a transformation in any of those fields. So there's still a great urgency to figure out how to do that. And there were other perspectives as well. Jenny or Gore, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just I think I'm muted, not know at the end of the session before. Yeah, I was coming down very heavily on the need for peace studies people to enter social psychology. That I claim that denial is one of the major forces that's holding back everything in climate and social everything. And I think the franticness of denial, it happens to be my own leading defense too, so I'm very familiar with denial. But I think that's become a national kind of obsession. The mass media don't report on it. The politicians don't quite pick up on it. And I think it's urgent that we understand, why do people run away when they're frightened, and then call that bold or masculine or something like that.
Thank you. I think in conclusion, one of the themes was that, we all come from different disciplines and we need to bring them together, whether it's law, politics, sociology, psychology. We can't succeed without bringing them together.
Well, thank you so much. And we're going to, I hope there's still other groups that would want to enrich our discussions with what they talked about as a group. And I'm hoping also that Professor Kurtz and others are thinking about the next steps, so we can talk about this before we wind up today. So we'll get back to that. You've got maybe 5-10 minutes to think about this. And I hope there are next steps that will take this very academic discussion out to the rest of the world. Is there another group that would want to share what their discussions were about? There were more than 4 groups, weren't there? Professor Turpin, you will know if there were more than 4 groups.
There were originally more than 4 groups, and then when Settle randomly assigned us, I'm not sure how many we ultimately had, but we ended up with several rapporteurs clustered into groups because we were randomly assigned. But that may be all, in terms of who wants to report back.
I'm happy to do a report.
Okay, great.
I was in group 10, and my colleagues who are still here, Nagar Danielle and Lester Kurtz's daughter, were both in it. Just a very brief summary. We had a very interesting discussion. We introduced ourselves. We talked mostly about the war in Ukraine and its challenge to peace studies and academia. And what was very interesting about our group is one of us, Nagar, who is from the Cameroon, had been doing a master's degree in Moscow at university there, and is quite familiar with Russian intellectual life and so on. And she was putting forward an interesting sort of perspective, which she can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically Russia has the right to invade Ukraine because it's part of their post-imperialist world. And the thesis she was proposing is that there's an unwritten rule in international relations that if you once owned colonies, you have the right to reinvade them if they want to go off and do something dreadful, like asserting total independence. That was challenged by Lester's daughter, who felt that that's not probably a very good role model. If all countries start doing that, you know, Britain, we can reinvade Ireland and make them join NATO because they're actually neutral internationally. So anyway, we had very interesting discussion about about that, and you know, the cultural aspects of warfare. And I think my contribution was to lament the fact, you know, I was elected coordinator of Philosophers for Peace in 1990 in Moscow, when we thought Russia was going to be playing ball like a normal nation. You know, it was the end of the Cold War. We got over Stalinism and all the horrors and all that. And we welcomed Russia into the international system in good faith, I think. Those of us that can think back then, we all thought there was going to be a peace dividend. The Cold War was over and all that. What I didn't realize, and what I think Ukraine has woken me up to, and I did my degree and my PhD on Cold War history and politics and philosophy, is that Putin and his cabal of intelligence agents have been working behind the scenes all this time, not playing by the rules, but sort of planning strategically how they can get back at the West. And so I think one of the things I lament is that the peace community, peace research community, peace education community, we didn't have enough conversations with Russia. I had conversations with Russian philosophers at very high level. They're all signed up for this, but obviously it didn't trickle down into Russian society. And it certainly didn't trickle into Putin's circle. We had a power crazy bunch of people stealing power in Russia, in my opinion, and then applying the dirty rule book of propaganda, KGB, and all that stuff, which is what's happened. So I think we're all failures. I'm going to sound, instead of patting each other on the back and how great we are, no, we completely failed, because I feel personally I failed to bring Russia into the conversation in a way that could have prevented this throwback to a sort of Stalinist, we have the right to conquer who we want type of thinking. How on earth did we not see this coming and then not reach out? So I would like to suggest to everyone on this chat, we should have we should do a second rerun and invite Ukrainian and Russian educators to join us, you know, because I have friends who are in Ukraine, profound philosophers. I can facilitate that, except most of them are sheltering in basements under bombardment. And I also have friends in Russian intellectual circles, you know. So anyway, that's some of what we discussed, and it was really interesting. And Lester, you have a great daughter. She's an absolute tribute to you, and she'll take over when we're all dead and gone. So there is hope for the world. We need more young people to get involved. Thank you so much.
Great. Looks like she should have been here to hear that. But that's wonderful. So we've got a few more minutes. We will end up with probable next steps. But we would love to hear from another group, at least one or two other groups. Anybody from any one of the groups can just say something about the group.
Well, while they're waiting, can I jump in here for a second?
Sure.
You know, what Thomas was saying about Russia reminded me so much. We were supposed to be in the history section, but we didn't discuss this. The humiliation of Germany after World War I. And again, I'm not a historian, but I understand that the failure to bring Germany in, you know, helped to lead to World War II. And here we have maybe a repeat of that with failure to help Russia develop a positive identity after the disintegration of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire. And now, of course, the next issue, and I'm reminded of our you know, one of my mentor, Johann Galtung, talking about the fall of the American Empire. And the question of, you know, okay, you know, America, the United States of America can also become quite dangerous as the world heats up climatically and politically as it begins to watch its power slip away in the world system. And so that you know, this idea of how we include people, civilizations, nations, and so on, especially as it seems to me clear that we're seeing the end of white supremacy. Finally, thank God, the end of white supremacy. But that also makes, all of those people who've been in power and see it slipping away, who still own the capital, right? I mean, they still have the concentration of wealth, and wondering what kinds of things can we do to bridge those gaps. Well, I've talked too much already. Let me pass it back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Les. And do we one more opportunity going for someone to educate us on what came out of the group? Anyone else?
Yes, yeah, I want to say something. Yeah.
Feeling that there would be many people asking.
So,
Professor Shukla, please.
Yeah, I just would like to. We have to be. Yeah, we really have to.
Okay, we've got two people. Yes, you can.
Very fair with the international system. I'm not supposed. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, and then yes, and then we'll have Professor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So we really have to be very in Russia, but also sometime young people and the researcher thinks about the European Union expansion and also the NATO expansion towards all these countries and other territories, which are really creating a threat for the international security system. For example, of course, the expansion and expansion of European Union and expansion of NATO towards Ukraine. To include into the European Union system, which actually created a threat to the Ukraine. And the second thing which I would like to add is that the reaction we see of the international community towards Ukraine, we haven't seen the reaction towards Afghanistan, for example, to Syria or to Iraq, to all these other countries. The international community is like should play, of course, a fair play and should react in a fair way towards all these conflicts which we are now having and we are suffering now.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, I will then, yes. Professor Shukla, please. Unmute your mic and please unmute your mic. Professor Shukla, your microphone up is turned off, so you have to unmute it. No, you're unmuting your video instead. Or you're turning off your video. No, the mic.
Okay, it's okay now? Yeah,
yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I've been wanting to say it's been a total pleasure from the day I got to work with the person Lester Kurtz on the Encyclopedia till today. It's been an awesome experience, and the academic expanse has just grown over time. I'm very grateful to him, to the publishers, to the organizers, to you, for doing it all. And of course, Gandhi's way is the only way out. And I was most disturbed with the Ukraine happening, especially it was a failure of everybody's diplomacy, and right under everybody's nose, it just happened, and nobody could do a thing about it. That's it, where Gandhi's non-violence comes into the fore. Look at the people who have died and the homes which have been destroyed. There's only one way to, kind of collaborate and get together and have a peaceful world, We had hardly got out of the pandemic when Ukraine happened. And this is another aspect which needs to be assuaged with a non-violent kind of a thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've got just a few more minutes. I know that there were some young people or some young person who wanted to say something, and I don't want to give the impression that you are not included or you're not supposed to be included in this conversation. So please just identify yourself and turn on your mic.
Yes, I wanted to say something concerning what Professor Thomas Dapron said. So we were in group 10, and I wanted to rectify something. Then I said that peace. I think in this conflict, Europe and NATO and the US should add want to create peace, because when the conflict started, I read a few books from American political scientists, and they said that the people in Washington want to cross the red line with Putin, and Putin has said repeatedly that offering Ukraine NATO membership will be crossing the red line. So I think instead of creating I think this war was pushed by taunting NATO membership for Ukraine, and for Putin it was unacceptable. And apart from that, I think the United Nations organizations provided a very bad example of peace when the Russian foreign minister had to make a speech, and many diplomats stood up and left. I think for peace, we need to listen to both sides of the story and allow each side to make its point without hushing down one and just listening to one side. I think that gesture proved that there's some kind of a bias, and organizations must allow each side to give its own part of the story. And apart from that, I think journalists should be encouraged to really be brave and courageous in the face of threats, because they are usually the ones threatened, and when they get to lie to cover up stories, we find ourselves in these situations. And I think that journalists are at the forefront of this. I'm not versed in, I'm still a young researcher, but during our conversations in the peace webinar series, I learned of the role that journalists played in Rwanda. And I think in order to promote peace, we have to start by instilling a culture of bravery in these journalists, not to be mouthpieces for propaganda in order to create war and false narratives. I think that bravery and courage should be the whole mark of journalists in the 21st century in order to promote a culture of peace. And yeah, the thing I wanted to also correct was that I said that, okay, from my point of view, I'm a Cameroonian, and I see France's influence in Francophone Africa up till now. We are independent, but France still has a lot of say in our domestic affairs. So from that point of view, I understand why Ukraine, even though independent, could not be totally independent. I don't condone an incursion into the territory, but I think it should at best be a buffer zone and not join NATO, because it poses a major security threat to Russia. And lastly, I would like to mention that the unwritten rule that I noticed in international relations is that the Monroe Doctrine is still in force. You can see it in North America. I think the US knows that South America is a sphere of influence, and it should be the same for, it could be the same for Ukraine and Russia as it is the same for France and Francophone Africa. I want independence for and autodetermination for every country, but I think there's still some kind of a link between countries which have had a long history. Of course, their cohabitation should be peaceful, and so I just wanted to bring that correction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I think what you say, or what you've said, reinforces in a sense what Jonathan Greenberg said with regard to bringing perspectives to all of these issues. It's amazing you're coming at it from totally different angles. But we've run out of time, I must admit. We've gone way beyond the amount of a lot of people. Professor Kurtz, would you want to round this up, or and maybe give a sense of what next? Because I think such a massive undertaking cannot be left to the shelves of our various offices and like Professor Kurtz.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been so exciting for me, and let me just close. As I was thinking about, it's so difficult to get drawn down. When we talk about violence and we talk about George Mutalemwa put it, does Putin get the last word? And the answer to that question is no. I was reminded of a dear friend of mine, Mary Berwick, was at a peace conference in The Hague years ago, and she was out in the lobby. She happened to run into Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and so she thanked him for coming to participate in this peace conference, and the Archbishop took hold of her hands and said, thank you, Mary. This is so important for us. And when I was growing up in South Africa, I never thought that we would abolish apartheid in my lifetime. But if we can abolish apartheid, we can abolish war. And I think that if we think about the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of apartheid, the many positive things, the continued persistence and resilience of loving communities in the midst of violence, I think, and the possibilities from this incredible group of people who've come together, both in the written word, which a lot of us won't be able to see, and because it's too expensive. But the spoken word, the kinds of energy that we saw in this meeting, I'm really grateful and hopeful. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm still hoping you'll mention a couple of next steps, Professor Kurtz. Someone talked about bringing in Russian and Ukrainian speakers to another meeting like this. We mentioned the possibility of engaging with the UN in ways more direct than we've done so far. So there are ways ahead, and the young lady talked about bringing in communications experts, to help take the message out. So there's still work to be done. We're not going to. There's no Peace for the weary, as it's often said. So, Professor Kurtz, anything else about moving forward? I know you switched off.
I think we're out of time, and I know people are gradually leaving. So
okay, all right. Well,
times they are changing.
Thank you.
Writers and critics who prophesize with your pen, keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin, and there's no telling who that it's naming. For the loser now will be later to win, for the times they are a-changing. Come senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall. For he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled. There's a battle outside and it's raging. And I'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changing. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly aging. Get out of the new one if you can't lend a hand, for the times they are a-changing. Well, the line it is drawn and the curse it is cast. The slow one now will later be fast, as the present now will later be past. The order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changing.
Bob Dylan at the White House. Thank you.